You finally secure the promotion you've been working toward for, I don't know, the better part of 3 years.
Right.
Or perhaps you meet a partner who is genuinely communicative, someone who remembers the small details and offers actual emotional stability.
Which is incredibly rare.
Exactly. Or maybe you establish a health routine, and for the first time in a decade, you are waking up with sustained energy.
You're objectively thriving.
You are. And then, seemingly without any external provocation, you initiate a relationship-ending argument over something entirely trivial.
Yeah.
Or you miss a non-negotiable deadline at that new job because you spent 7 hours meticulously reorganizing your digital file system.
Oh, the digital file system. We have all been there.
Right. Or you just completely abandon the health routine and regress into the exact behavioral patterns you swore you had outgrown.
Mm.
The central question we are tackling today is why this happens. Why is it that the very moment your life circumstances begin improving, you introduce chaos?
It's a universal experience.
It really is.
Yeah.
So today we're taking a deep dive into the architecture of self-sabotage.
And the stack of material we're looking at to answer that question is exceptionally robust.
Oh, it's massive.
We are pulling from clinical analyses of attachment theory, neuroscience papers detailing habit loops, and psychological research concerning identity conflict.
And emotional regulation, too.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But the most critical starting point, the paradigm shift that really frames all of these sources, is that we have to discard the traditional moral judgments surrounding self-sabotage.
Which is huge, because usually we just blame ourselves, right?
We do.
Yeah.
But if we look at the clinical literature, there is a strict consensus that self-sabotage is not a manifestation of laziness.
Right.
It's not a lack of discipline. And it is certainly not a character flaw.
So what is it then?
The science characterizes it as a highly sophisticated, though undeniably maladaptive, biological and psychological survival strategy.
A survival strategy. That's wild.
It is. The brain isn't actively trying to ruin your progress. It is executing a deeply ingrained protocol designed to protect you.
Okay, that framing completely alters the landscape of how we need to look at this.
Yeah.
Because if the brain is executing a protection protocol by causing me to fail a critical presentation, the immediate question is what exactly it perceives as the threat.
Right. What is it protecting you from?
Exactly. And the research points toward this invisible psychological boundary that dictates our capacity for positive experience.
The upper limit problem.
Yes. The sources heavily reference the upper limit problem, which is a concept developed by psychologist Gay Hendricks.
It's a brilliant framework.
It really is. He utilizes a very grounding analogy here. He compares our capacity for happiness to a standard thermostat in a home. So if you set a thermostat to 70 degrees, the system maintains that baseline.
Right, it regulates.
If the temperature rises to 75 because the sun is shining directly through the windows, the air conditioning automatically engages to pull the temperature back down to that familiar 70 degrees.
To restore the baseline.
Exactly. Hendricks posits that we all possess a psychological thermostat setting for how much success, intimacy, and joy we can tolerate before our internal cooling system kicks in.
And the biological mechanics of why that cooling system engages are just fascinating.
Break that down for us.
Well, when you experience a rapid improvement in your life,
like a sudden financial windfall.
Yes, or entering a remarkably healthy relationship, you are forced outside of your established psychological baseline.
Consciously, you're thrilled.
Consciously, you are elated. You're achieving your goals. But subconsciously, the brain interprets this unfamiliar influx of positive stimuli as a direct threat to its homeostasis.
Because it's unfamiliar.
Precisely. The brain functions as a prediction engine. It relies on homeostasis, which is the maintenance of stable, predictable conditions to ensure survival.
So it wants to know what's coming next.
Always. When the emotional temperature of your life elevates too quickly, even if that elevation is objectively positive, it registers as unpredictable.
And to the brain, unpredictable means dangerous.
To the primitive parts of the brain, unpredictability equates to vulnerability. Therefore, when you hit that upper limit, the psychological air conditioning engages.
You subconsciously initiate a behavior that sabotages the new dynamic.
Right. You intentionally cause a regression back into the familiar, predictable zone where you feel secure.
Wow. And the tragic irony here is that the familiar zone might be objectively miserable.
It often is.
I was reading Karen Salmonson's work in our sources, and she introduces this concept of masochistic equilibrium.
That's a powerful term.
It really stuck with me. She observes that individuals who have acclimated to chaotic environments,
Like growing up in a highly volatile household.
yeah, or spending years in toxic workplaces, they develop a baseline where stress is the norm.
It's what they know.
Exactly. For these individuals, the absence of chaos actually induces anxiety.
Because the quiet feels dangerous.
Yes. The quiet is unpredictable. She uses this term, entertainer, to describe someone who subconsciously curates drama.
Entertainer. I love that.
Right. It's someone who entertains their social circle with endless stories of their chaotic dating life or their hostile work environment simply because that friction feels like home. They are engaging in behaviors that maintain their masochistic equilibrium because peace feels too threatening.
And that observation is strongly supported by the evolutionary biology perspectives in our stack.
Especially the clinical research of Dr. Charlie Harriet Maitland.
Yes, his work is crucial here. He emphasizes that the human brain evolved primarily as a survival mechanism.
Not a happiness optimization tool.
Exactly. It's not designed to make you happy. It's designed to keep you alive. For our early ancestors, survival depended entirely on predictability.
If an environment was predictable, you could anticipate threats.
Right. Being caught off guard by a predator or a sudden environmental shift was almost certainly fatal.
So the human nervous system is wired to view any unpredictable state, even an unpredictably positive one, as the most dangerous state a human can occupy.
The brain prefers a known negative over an unknown positive.
Which introduces one of the most counterintuitive concepts in the entire stack.
The controlled explosions.
Yes, the idea of controlled explosions. Dr. Harriet Maitland argues that the brain would rather deal with the certainty of a threat it created itself.
Than the unpredictability of a positive outcome it cannot control.
It is a profound realization. The brain fundamentally prefers to be the architect of its own failure rather than risk the vulnerability of unknown success.
It's a brilliant, albeit destructive way to conceptualize the defense mechanism.
Walk us through how that looks in practice.
Okay, think about it like this. If you commit entirely to a new venture.
Say starting a business.
Right. You invest your capital, your time, your emotional energy, and it fails.
That is an uncontrolled explosion.
Exactly. It's an unpredictable devastation that leaves you incredibly vulnerable. You didn't see it coming.
You gave it your all and still lost.
Yes. However, if you procrastinate, if you intentionally miss key meetings, or if you refuse to finalize the product,
The venture still fails.
it still fails, but it becomes a controlled explosion.
You maintained agency over the failure.
Precisely. Your brain recognizes the failure, processes it as a familiar outcome, and essentially concludes that the survival protocol was successful.
That's insane. So you avoided the unpredictable devastation by preemptively detonating the project yourself.
It is a rehearsal of internally generated hostility to protect against the possibility of external hostility.
So if you are listening to this and evaluating your own recent career or relationship setbacks, it is really worth asking whether you are unconsciously staging these controlled explosions.
Are you choosing the familiarity of a predictable disappointment over the terrifying uncertainty of actualizing your potential?
That's the core question. And the neurobiology backing this up is just staggering.
The data is undeniable.
The data provided by the Flow Research Collective illustrates that this isn't just an abstract psychological theory, it is a measurable physical reality.
It's happening in your nervous system.
Right. They found that when individuals approach significant achievement, the brain literally lacks the capacity to distinguish between an identity threat and a physical, mortal danger.
The physiological overlap is virtually identical.
I was blown away by this study. The Flow Research Collective conducted comparative studies on high-performing populations to map this biological response.
Right. They analyzed the neurological data of senior technology executives.
Executives who were preparing for massive corporate transitions involving vast new public responsibilities.
And then they compared that data to Air Force pilots.
Pilots preparing for critical, high-stakes combat missions.
And what did they find?
The metrics demonstrated that both groups produced indistinguishable cortisol spikes and sympathetic nervous system activations.
Indistinguishable.
The executive preparing to deliver a keynote speech to stakeholders is undergoing the exact same biochemical cascade of fight, flight, or freeze as the pilot stepping onto the tarmac.
Because the brain perceives the social and identity risks of the corporate transition as a literal threat to biological survival.
The implication there is profound. Your nervous system is treating a shift in your corporate title like a predatory encounter.
Like a tiger is chasing you.
Exactly. And the sources identify three specific neural pathways that facilitate the sabotage.
Understanding this physical wiring seems like the necessary first step to dismantling the behavior.
Let's break them down. The first pathway they outline is the threat response circuit.
Yes, the threat response circuit is perpetually scanning the environment for any indication of status loss or social alienation.
And what is particularly illuminating in the literature is a study demonstrating how sensitive this circuit is to identity changes.
The 300% study.
Yes. The study showing that the nervous system produces threat responses up to 300% stronger when the stakes involve an identity change rather than a purely financial outcome.
Which makes sense evolutionarily.
Right, because losing a significant amount of money generates a baseline stress response.
But changing your fundamental identity.
For instance, shifting your self-concept from the struggling creative to the highly compensated executive.
That triggers a threat response 3 times as powerful.
Why is it so much stronger?
Because the brain heuristically calculates that an identity shift carries a massive risk of alienating your current social support structure.
And historically, being alienated from your tribe meant isolation and death.
Exactly. You didn't survive alone in the wilderness.
A 300% increase in the threat response simply for succeeding and changing how people perceive you.
It contextualizes so much of the anxiety surrounding success.
It really does. Now, the second pathway detailed in the research is the reward prediction pathway.
This one governs the immediate behavioral manifestations of self-sabotage.
Specifically, our tendency to choose short-term comfort over long-term goals.
Right. The brain essentially miscalculates the value of delayed gratification.
It heavily discounts the future reward in favor of immediate dopamine stabilization.
This is the biological root of why you might spend 3 hours organizing your inbox instead of drafting the proposal that is actually due.
Because the brain guarantees an immediate, albeit minor, neurochemical reward from clearing the inbox.
While the reward of the proposal feels temporally distant and neurologically uncertain.
The brain wants the sure thing now.
That temporal discounting is a critical mechanism.
Okay, so that's two. The third pathway, however, is arguably the most complex and deeply rooted.
The identity preservation network.
Yes. The primary function of this network is to monitor for cognitive dissonance.
It constantly compares your external actions and circumstances against your deeply entrenched internal self-concept.
So if your internal narrative dictates that you are inherently disorganized,
Or that you are fundamentally unworthy of a healthy relationship.
but your external reality suddenly features a highly organized workflow or a remarkably supportive partner.
The identity preservation network detects a critical mismatch.
And it freaks out.
It generates intense cognitive dissonance, which manifests as literal physical and mental distress.
Because your external environment no longer aligns with your internal map of reality.
And the brain cannot stand that friction. So it will systematically compel you to act destructively until your external circumstances degrade enough to match your internal beliefs once again.
Let's trace the exact sequence of this neurological hijacking.
Okay.
When you cross that upper limit, or when that cognitive dissonance peaks, what is the specific chemical cascade occurring in the brain?
According to the clinical papers, it starts in the amygdala.
The brain's primary threat detection center.
Exactly. The amygdala flags the impending success or the increased visibility as a critical danger,
And this triggers the release of cortisol.
which saturates the system and initiates a prolonged state of hypervigilance.
The presence of cortisol is where the cognitive impairment really begins, right?
Yes. Once cortisol floods the system, it actively suppresses the prefrontal cortex.
And that's the region of the brain responsible for executive function.
Logical reasoning, long-term planning, impulse control, all of it.
It essentially powers down.
It's totally offline. This is why you cannot logically reason your way out of a self-sabotaging spiral.
Because the neurological hardware required for logic is literally disabled.
Right. Concurrently, the insula, which processes interoception.
Your awareness of your internal bodily states.
Exactly. The insula amplifies the physical sensations associated with the change.
So your heart rate variability drops, your chest tightens, your digestion alters.
The change physically feels like illness or impending doom.
So if the executive function is offline, relying on sheer willpower to push through the resistance is a fundamentally flawed strategy.
It's useless. You are attempting to utilize a brain region that is chemically suppressed.
And the research specifically highlights the role of mineralocorticoid receptors in the amygdala during this cortisol flood.
Yes, those receptors are key.
When they are activated, they actively shift the brain away from flexible, learning-based cognitive processes.
And lock it into rigid, habit-based memory systems.
Your biology is physically compelling you to revert to your oldest, most deeply ingrained behavioral patterns.
Because it calculates that those familiar habits are the safest route to surviving the perceived threat.
The tragedy of the mechanism is that the nervous system is executing its protocol perfectly.
It's doing exactly what it was designed to do.
But it's operating on severely outdated environmental data.
It is aggressively protecting you from a social or identity shift as if it were a physical predator.
Which provides a seamless transition into the psychological drivers of the behavior.
Right.
We readily acknowledge the fear of failure in our culture. It is an entirely normalized concept.
Everyone talks about the fear of failure.
Everyone. However, the literature suggests that the fear of success is often a far more potent and paralyzing driver of self-sabotage.
It's the silent killer of progress.
Abraham Maslow wrote extensively about this. He referred to it as the Jonah complex.
The evasion of one's own destiny.
Yes, or the profound fear of one's own greatness. We construct conscious narratives about wanting to achieve significant goals.
But the subconscious reality of actualizing those goals is terrifying.
The responsibilities and consequences of success carry an immense psychological weight.
When we deconstruct what success actually entails, the avoidance behavior becomes entirely logical.
Significant achievement guarantees increased visibility.
You are exposed.
You are subject to greater scrutiny, and the potential for a public failure increases exponentially.
Furthermore, success immediately raises expectations.
Both internal expectations and the demands placed upon you by your environment.
And there's also the critical issue of outshining others.
This one is so common. Within many family systems or tight-knit social communities, there is an implicit, unspoken mandate to maintain the status quo.
Surpassing the established baseline of your community can trigger a profound, subconscious fear of disloyalty.
The nervous system calculates that if you achieve too much, you will alienate your peer group.
You'll lose your support system and face total isolation.
The fear of outgrowing your environment and facing that isolation ties directly back into the identity preservation network and cognitive dissonance.
It's a perfect storm.
To make this abstract concept highly tangible for you listening, consider how this manifests in financial psychology.
The financial examples are always so clear.
They are. Suppose an individual has deeply internalized the narrative that they are perpetually struggling with money.
Perhaps they grew up in an environment where financial scarcity was a constant source of stress.
And it became a core component of their identity.
Right.
If that individual suddenly lands a highly lucrative contract or receives a massive promotion,
Their conscious mind is thrilled.
but their subconscious is thrown into a state of severe cognitive dissonance.
Their external financial reality completely contradicts their internal identity map.
And because the brain fundamentally cannot tolerate prolonged cognitive dissonance, it will initiate a correction protocol.
The individual will almost reflexively engage in financial self-sabotage.
They might make impulsive, high-risk investments.
Or neglect essential accounting responsibilities.
Or engage in lavish, uncharacteristic spending.
They will continue this behavioral loop until the capital is depleted and they are returned to their familiar state of financial struggle.
And the wild part is, the moment they cross back into scarcity, the cognitive dissonance resolves.
The anxiety dissipates.
Because their external reality, once again, validates their internal identity.
They have restored their psychological equilibrium, regardless of how objectively damaging the outcome is.
That is the controlled explosion executed flawlessly.
It really is.
Another pervasive mechanism the research details is self-handicapping.
The classic universal example here is the professional or the student who faces a critical, high-stakes evaluation.
Like a massive presentation or a final exam.
Right. And they intentionally delay their preparation until the night before.
We've all seen this or done it.
If they fail the evaluation, their ego is entirely protected.
They can attribute the failure to the external handicap.
I simply ran out of time, or I was exhausted.
The failure doesn't reflect their inherent intelligence or capability.
Exactly. Conversely, if they somehow succeed despite the lack of preparation,
It becomes a monumental triumph.
they succeeded in spite of the massive obstacle they created, proving exceptional competence.
In either scenario, the individual avoids the true vulnerability of giving absolute effort and risking genuine failure.
The core function of self-handicapping is to shield the ego from the ultimate, terrifying question.
What happens if I dedicate 100% of my resources, give my absolute best effort, and the market or the environment still dictates that I am not good enough?
That is the fear. Self-handicapping ensures that the individual never actually has to confront the limits of their own ability.
This behavior has deep roots in psychodynamic theory, right?
Yes. Freud conceptualized a similar mechanism called repetition compulsion.
This is the unconscious drive to continuously recreate painful or unresolved scenarios from the past.
The subconscious intent is to re-enter the familiar trauma in a futile attempt to finally gain mastery or control over the outcome.
So if an individual experienced profound powerlessness or rejection in their early development,
They may unconsciously engineer situations in their adult life that guarantee rejection.
attempting to rewrite the ending of a script that was finalized decades ago.
It's a very poignant way to look at it.
Which brings us to the most foundational aspect of the research stack.
The developmental blueprints.
We have examined the neurobiology, the cognitive dissonance, and the defensive strategies of the ego, but we need to understand where these internal blueprints are originally drafted.
Section 4 of our sources delves into childhood development and attachment theory.
We are specifically looking at the framework of integrated attachment theory developed by Tice Gibson.
Her work is groundbreaking in this space.
It really explains how our earliest interactions with our primary caregivers permanently calibrate our nervous systems.
If those early environments were inconsistent, emotionally volatile, or neglectful,
The nervous system physically wires itself to associate emotional connection, visibility, and reliance on others with danger.
Tice Gibson's framework introduces a crucial paradigm for understanding motivation.
Right, because we generally conceptualize our goals as approach goals.
We want to acquire the promotion, we want to establish a healthy relationship, we are approaching a positive outcome.
However, the data indicates that self-sabotage is almost exclusively driven by avoidance goals.
This is a key distinction.
When you sabotage a relationship, you are not actually avoiding the intimacy itself.
You are desperately attempting to avoid the specific, highly personalized psychological wound that your nervous system was conditioned to expect whenever intimacy occurs.
You are preemptively striking to avoid the repetition of a childhood pain.
To understand how this plays out, we really need to examine the 3 insecure attachment styles detailed in the literature.
Because each style executes a distinctly different sabotage protocol.
Yes.
If you are listening, you will likely recognize elements of your own behavior or the behavior of past partners in these descriptions.
It's very confronting, but very necessary.
The first profile is the fearful avoidant.
Often referred to in clinical settings as disorganized attachment.
Right. The core psychological wounds driving this behavioral profile are the deeply held beliefs that I am fundamentally defective and emotional investment inevitably leads to pain.
So how does the fearful avoidant manifest self-sabotage in a practical scenario?
The fearful avoidant profile is characterized by a severe, oscillating hot and cold cycle,
They possess a profound, desperate craving for emotional connection.
but they are simultaneously terrified of the vulnerability required to maintain it.
In a romantic context, they predictably hit what the clinical literature terms the happiness threshold.
And this typically occurs roughly 2 to 3 months into a genuinely stable, healthy dynamic.
As the intimacy deepens and the relationship requires genuine trust, their nervous system detects a critical threat.
Because they associate peace with the calm before a storm.
A stable environment feels like a trap.
So to regain control, they will actively dismantle the relationship.
They might manufacture intense conflicts over trivial issues,
Suddenly identify arbitrary deal breakers in a previously ideal partner,
or engage in relentless testing behaviors.
pushing the boundaries of the relationship until the partner is finally forced to withdraw or terminate the connection.
And the devastating reality is that when the partner finally withdraws, it validates the fearful avoidance core internal narrative.
Their brain processes the breakup and concludes the protocol was correct. I am defective and love always results in abandonment.
It is a closed-loop, self-fulfilling prophecy.
The second profile is the anxious preoccupied attachment style.
This individual operates from the core wound of believing, I am inherently not enough.
How does their sabotage protocol differ from the fearful avoidant?
The anxious preoccupied individual sabotages primarily through chronic overfunctioning.
Because their baseline assumption is that they are insufficient.
Right. So they attempt to secure their position in a relationship or a workplace through relentless, unsustainable effort,
Yeah, chronic people pleasers.
consistently suppressing their own boundaries and needs to accommodate others.
Which inevitably generates a massive, unrecognized reservoir of resentment that eventually fractures the relationship.
Furthermore, they require constant, exhausting levels of external reassurance.
And they are prone to severe catastrophizing.
If their partner is delayed in responding to a message, their cognitive architecture doesn't assume a benign delay like traffic or a meeting.
It immediately assumes total abandonment.
The tragic paradox of the anxious, preoccupied style is that their desperate, clinging behaviors
The constant surveillance and the demands for validation.
are precisely what exhausts their partners and precipitate the exact abandonment they are frantically trying to prevent.
They literally manufacture the outcome they fear most through their attempts to prevent it.
Yes.
The third insecure profile outlined in the sources is the dismissive avoidant.
Their psychological framework is built upon the core wounds that other people are fundamentally unreliable and I must maintain absolute self-sufficiency to survive.
What is the signature self-sabotage tactic for this profile?
The dismissive avoidant executes sabotage through premature exits and severe emotional compartmentalization.
They learned during critical developmental windows that relying on external support structures yields disappointment or neglect.
Therefore, they mathematically equate emotional independence with physical survival,
The moment a relationship begins demanding genuine vulnerability,
or the moment the concept of long-term commitment is introduced.
their nervous system registers a containment threat and they execute an exit strategy.
Additionally, they often unconsciously select partners who possess glaring incompatibilities or obvious red flags,
Why do they do that?
because an inherently flawed or geographically distant partner ensures the relationship can never achieve true depth.
Thereby protecting the dismissive avoidant from the risk of serious emotional investment.
When conflicts inevitably arise, rather than engaging in resolution, they completely shut down their emotional processing centers.
Stonewalling their partner to maintain their autonomy.
Precisely.
Having mapped the neurobiology, the cognitive dissonance loops, and the developmental attachment blueprints, it is critical to transition into the practical application.
Because theory is great, but we need to know how to stop doing it.
Exactly. Section 5 of our deep dive focuses on identifying the hidden faces of sabotage in your immediate environment.
We need to clearly define these behavioral patterns so that you, listening, can recognize them functioning in real time.
Let's systematically look at how this manifests across different domains of life, starting with professional environments.
In professional settings, the behaviors are often heavily disguised as positive traits.
Which makes them particularly insidious.
Perfectionism is a primary example.
Culturally, we praise perfectionism.
We do, but psychologically, it is a highly effective sabotage mechanism.
If you refuse to finalize a project, endlessly delaying submission because it isn't flawless,
The project can never be evaluated.
and consequently, you can never be criticized or judged.
Chronic procrastination is another massive indicator.
Prioritizing short-term emotional regulation over long-term career advancement.
Imposter syndrome functions similarly.
The internalized belief that you are a fraud despite objective evidence of your competence.
It prevents you from advocating for promotions or taking necessary risks.
Finally, there is a tendency to overcommit
Volunteering for every committee and accepting every assignment,
until you reach a state of total cognitive and physical burnout.
which inevitably forces you to drop critical responsibilities.
In the context of relationships, we have discussed the mechanics of attachment theory, but practically, it looks like maintaining a perpetual exit strategy,
Keeping one foot out the door,
maintaining secondary options,
or refusing to fully integrate your life with a partner just in case the dynamic fails.
It involves constantly testing boundaries, intentionally initiating conflicts just to see if the partner will endure them.
And actively generating distance, the exact moment emotional intimacy begins to feel secure.
And then there is the domain of personal health and habit formation.
This is where individuals predictably abandon a rigorous training protocol or nutritional plan the exact week before they achieve their target metric.
It involves utilizing food, alcohol, or mindless consumption as somatic regulators when the stress of positive change becomes overwhelming.
It also manifests as extreme social isolation.
Actively withdrawing from support networks precisely when that support is most critical.
The clinical literature introduces a profound reframe for analyzing all of these behaviors.
To deconstruct self-sabotage, we must acknowledge that every single one of these destructive patterns provides a hidden, short-term benefit to the ego.
These behaviors are not arbitrary malfunctions.
They are highly strategic operations designed to yield an immediate psychological payoff.
If we want to intercept the behavior, we first have to identify the specific benefit it is providing.
Analyzing the hidden benefits completely alters the perspective.
It really does.
If we look at the examples we just discussed, the hidden benefit of extreme social isolation is absolute protection from rejection.
If you decline the invitation and isolate in your apartment, it is mathematically impossible for anyone to ignore or slight you at the event.
The hidden benefit of chronic underachievement is the total evasion of expectations.
If you consistently establish a low baseline of performance, no one will ever rely on you.
And therefore, you can never disappoint them.
The hidden benefit of perfectionism is the complete avoidance of vulnerability and critique,
And understanding that logic is the foundation for practicing radical self-compassion.
which is non-negotiable for healing.
The standard cultural response to self-sabotage is immense shame and harsh self-criticism.
We berate ourselves for lacking discipline.
But shame thrives in isolation and reinforces the narrative that you are uniquely flawed.
When you objectively analyze the hidden benefits, you realize your behavior is entirely logical given the historical data your nervous system is operating on.
Your mind engineered these specific strategies to manage risk and survive environments that felt fundamentally unsafe.
You are not exhibiting weakness,
Your protective mechanisms are simply operating with extraordinary misplaced efficiency.
which brings
It possesses the physical capability to unlearn them and build new adaptive pathways.
we are not biologically condemned to repeat these loops.
Let's examine the specific interventions, beginning with the biological protocols designed to regulate the nervous system.
Because the entire cascade of self-sabotage originates as a biological threat response in the amygdala, cognitive interventions are largely ineffective until the biology is regulated.
You can't think your way out of a physiological panic.
Exactly. The Flow Research Collective utilizes a highly specific physiological protocol known as the 90-second reset.
When you encounter a trigger, when you feel the sudden compulsion to snap aggressively at your partner,
Or the overwhelming urge to abandon a complex task for a dopamine distraction.
you are experiencing an acute cortisol spike,
The 90-second reset involves a deliberate breathing pattern,
often utilizing physiological sighs.
which consists of a deep nasal inhalation, a secondary short inhalation to fully inflate the lungs, followed by an extended slow exhalation through the mouth.
Executing this specific pattern for just 90 seconds has been empirically shown to actively deactivate the amygdala's alarm system.
And reduce circulating cortisol levels by up to 23%.
You are physically interrupting the chemical protection cascade before it can dictate your behavior.
Reducing cortisol by 23% in a minute and a half is a profound biological intervention.
You are effectively overriding the body's automated alarm system.
Once the nervous system is stabilized and the prefrontal cortex is back online, the research recommends engaging in identity expansion training.
And micro-challenge sequencing.
The concept here is to acclimate the nervous system to the experience of success without triggering the massive cognitive dissonance we discussed earlier.
These are daily 5-minute practices where you intentionally expose yourself to microscopic identity shifts.
If your overarching goal is to become a confident public speaker, you do not immediately schedule a keynote address.
That would trigger a maximum threat response.
Instead, you record a 30-second video on your phone discussing a topic you know well, and the only requirement is that you do not delete it,
You are microdosing the feeling of visibility and success.
allowing the brain to recognize that the exposure did not result in a catastrophic outcome.
Once the biological baseline is manageable, we transition into the cognitive interventions.
The sources rely heavily on established frameworks from cognitive behavioral therapy.
The primary mechanism is the catch it, check it, change it protocol.
First, you must develop the metacognition to catch the sabotaging thought in real time.
Second, you check that thought against objective reality.
Are you actually facing a survival threat, or are you simply experiencing the discomfort of novelty?
Finally, you consciously change the internal narrative.
This methodology is critical for dismantling what psychologists refer to as iceberg beliefs,
These are the massive, rigid, subconscious assumptions that dictate behavior.
such as the fundamental belief that I am inherently unlovable, or the assumption that achieving success guarantees physical burnout.
You have to actively interrogate and reframe those beliefs.
Instead of accepting the automated thought, I inevitably ruin everything good in my life.
You must consciously force the narrative shift to, my nervous system is attempting to protect me because this level of stability is unfamiliar, but I am objectively safe in this present moment.
The concept of panoramic vision, introduced in Karen Solvinson's work, is a brilliant cognitive tool for this reframing process.
She argues that our historical traumas and negative experiences have dirtied the psychological lens through which we view the world.
Causing us to anticipate pain even in benign situations.
To cleanse that lens, we must utilize panoramic vision.
This requires deliberately reviewing our painful past experiences and actively extracting 180-degree positive lessons from them.
It is a process of reclaiming agency over the narrative.
You pair that cognitive reframing with the consistent execution of daily micro-wins to systematically rebuild self-trust.
If you establish a minor commitment like drinking a specific amount of water upon waking or reading 2 pages of a book,
And you execute it consistently.
you are providing your subconscious with undeniable empirical evidence that you are a reliable operator.
You are slowly overwriting the identity of a self-saboteur.
The final and perhaps most crucial methodology we must address is somatic resourcing.
The work of clinical psychologist Peter Levine on somatic experiencing is central to modern trauma and sabotage therapies.
Cognitive behavioral therapy is often insufficient if the physical body remains locked in a state of hypervigilance.
Because self-sabotage is fundamentally a nervous system issue, we must utilize the body to heal the mind.
The clinical objective is to expand what is known as your window of tolerance.
This refers to your physiological capacity to process emotional intensity, both positive and negative, without dissociating, shutting down, or escalating into a panic state.
The specific somatic techniques detailed in the literature are profoundly simple, yet biologically powerful.
One primary technique is orienting to safety.
When you feel the physiological symptoms of the threat response escalating, the tightening chest, the shallow breathing, you physically halt your activity.
You deliberately and slowly scan your immediate physical environment, consciously acknowledging your absolute physical safety.
You internally verify there is the exit, there is a solid wall, there are no immediate physical threats in this space.
Another technique is vagal toning.
The vagus nerve is the primary control center for the parasympathetic nervous system, the rest and digest state.
To manually stimulate the vagus nerve and force a shift out of sympathetic survival mode, Levine suggests utilizing vocal resonance.
Such as making a deep, sustained VOO sound, focusing on the physical vibration in the torso.
While it may feel unconventional, it is a direct mechanical signal to the nervous system that the environment is secure enough to allow for relaxation.
The ultimate synthesis of all these methodologies, the 90-second breathing reset, the cognitive reframing of iceberg beliefs, the somatic orientation techniques, is designed to facilitate a fundamental philosophical shift.
We must abandon the elimination mindset.
We are culturally conditioned to declare war on our flaws, constantly striving to conquer, banish, or kill our inner saboteur.
But you cannot heal a fractured system by initiating a war against a part of yourself.
The sustainable approach is adopting an improvement mindset.
We must learn to befriend the protective mechanism.
We acknowledge its utility, recognizing that these hypervigilant strategies likely kept us psychologically intact during genuinely difficult developmental periods.
We express gratitude for its service.
And then we gently, persistently provide it with the data that the historical war is over, the environment has changed, and we are finally equipped to thrive safely.
That is the core of the work.
We have covered an immense amount of psychological and biological terrain today.
We really have.
To synthesize the journey, we deconstructed the upper limit problem, establishing why our capacity for happiness functions like a tightly regulated thermostat.
We examined the precise neurological hijacking executed by the amygdala and cortisol, demonstrating how the brain conflates corporate or social success with mortal danger.
We explored the foundational blueprints of self-sabotage formed in early childhood, analyzing how the fearful, anxious, and dismissive attachment styles utilize avoidance goals to manage intimacy.
And finally, we detailed the biological protocols, cognitive restructuring techniques, and somatic practices required to manually override these systems and expand our capacity for positive experience.
If there is a singular overarching principle to extract from this massive body of research, it is the absolute necessity of removing shame from the equation.
You are not broken. You are not inherently flawed, and your inability to sustain progress is not a moral failure.
Your self-sabotage is simply the manifestation of a fiercely loyal, highly efficient biological bodyguard that is operating on obsolete intelligence.
It does not realize the threat is past.
The work of the methodologies we discussed is simply the process of relieving that bodyguard of its duties.
Beautifully said.
I want to leave you, listening wherever you are right now, with a final perspective to consider as you navigate the inevitable friction of growth this week. Consider the possibility that your capacity to tolerate immense joy, profound intimacy, and sustained success functions exactly like muscular tissue.
When you engage in physical training and push a muscle to the absolute limit of its current capacity, the tissue physically tears.
In the moment, that microtrauma registers as failure. It manifests as acute pain, and it creates intense physiological resistance.
But the biological reality is that it's only through the repairing of those specific microscopic tears that the muscle synthesizes new tissue and expands its capacity to bear weight.
What if the next time you encounter a moment of intense self-sabotage, it is not an indication that you are fundamentally broken?
What if it is not a sign that you are backsliding or destined to fail?
What if that specific friction, that urge to retreat, is simply the exact psychological muscle tear required to fundamentally expand your internal capacity to hold the larger, more complex life you are building?
The resistance is not the enemy.
The resistance is the mechanism of expansion.
Wow.
This week, as you pursue your goals, when you inevitably hit your upper limit and you feel that familiar, urgent pull to dismantle your own progress, I want you to pause.
Use the 90 seconds.
Notice the physical sensation of the resistance. Acknowledge that it is simply your biology trying to keep you safe in the only way it knows how.
Thank it for the historical protection it provided.
And then, with absolute clarity and intention, gently step forward anyway.